So scientists around the world are trying to develop vaccines and treatments for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. And in order to develop effective treatments or vaccines, we need to understand a lot about the structure of the virus. And an important part of the virus's structure is proteins. Now, there are a whole bunch of different types of proteins. They're one of the most abundant molecules that make up living things. They include things like proteins in our muscles and hemoglobin, the protein in our blood that carries oxygen. Other types of proteins include hormones and enzymes, a whole bunch of things. And proteins are made up of chains of 20 different types of amino acids. But unlike the string of beads in this model, proteins don't exist in nice straight strands. Proteins are actually folded into complex twisted structures. And the function of a protein depends on its twisty, turny 3D shape. And if a protein loses its shape, then it loses its function. So understanding how proteins fold is really important for figuring out how to treat certain types of illnesses and for just generally understanding how living things function. Now, viruses, even though they're not really considered to be living things, they're made up of a lot of proteins too that have a lot of different functions. For example, SARS-CoV-2 has that recognizable spike protein on the outside that can latch on to living cells, causing an infection. Now, in order to develop treatments for these viruses, scientists need to understand how these proteins fold so that they can develop treatments that target those proteins. But it's not that easy because proteins are really small. We can't just easily look at them with a microscope and figure out how they're folded. And it's really hard to predict how proteins will fold because there are so many different possibilities. If you wanted to try to go through all of the different possible ways that one single protein can fold, it would take longer than the life of the universe. And this persistent protein puzzle is called the protein folding problem, and it is a notoriously difficult biological nut to crack. Now, there are laboratory techniques that scientists use to figure out how proteins are folded, but they can be expensive or time consuming, and sometimes they don't work for every single type of protein. So scientists are also thinking about using artificial intelligence programs like AlphaFold. Now, AlphaFold is a program from Google's DeepMind that tries to predict how proteins fold by using their amino acid sequence. Now, AlphaFold is a type of artificial intelligence called a neural network. And neural networks are really good for applications that involve recognizing patterns. But before a neural network can do its job, it needs to be trained by looking at lots and lots of examples. Now, to train AlphaFold to figure out how proteins fold, its developers used a data bank called the Protein Data Bank, which is a database that has a lot of information about the 3D structure of different types of proteins. So they showed AlphaFold all these different examples of how proteins fold so that it could learn what protein folding is. Then once AlphaFold is trained, it can try to predict how a protein folds that it's never seen before. Now, to do that, AlphaFold is given the protein's amino acid sequence, so the list of amino acids that make up the protein. And it tries to predict how the protein will fold based on how the amino acids are connected together. So how far apart they are or how much their connections bend. And before it decides what it thinks this protein looks like, AlphaFold goes through another process where it tries to improve on its predictions. Then finally, we get a model of the protein's twisty, foldy 3D shape. Now, AlphaFold was first published about a year ago as a way to help scientists solve the protein folding problem. But now, AlphaFold is being put to the test on SARS-CoV-2 proteins. Now, some of the virus's proteins, like that spike protein, have already been figured out by other methods. The AlphaFold team really wants to focus their efforts on determining the structure of some of the proteins in SARS-CoV-2 that aren't very well known. Now, so far, it looks like AlphaFold is doing a pretty good job, but its developers caution that it's still a work in progress, so they can't be 100% sure that the structures that AlphaFold predicts are definitely accurate. But they're continuing to make improvements and updates, and their goal is to use AlphaFold as a tool to help scientists who are trying to unlock the really complicated structure of the virus that's causing the COVID-19 pandemic.